Hey everyone, really excited to have you on again on another show of Go with the Workflow with Checkbox. My name is Evan, I'm your host for today, and I have a very exciting guest with me. Our first Chief Legal Officer on the show, Stacy. And Stacy Bratcher is the Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer at Cottage Health. She comes with a wealth of knowledge being in the general counsel seat for decades, but also she hosts the Legal Department podcast, which maybe we'll talk a little bit more about throughout the show. But I had the privilege of being a guest on her show. So we're doing a little bit of a podcast swapsies, if you will. Stacey, welcome to the show.
Evan, thanks so much for having me, and I'm really excited to continue our conversation. I really enjoyed getting to know you on my show, so thanks so much for inviting me here.
Absolutely. All right. Look, when I was on your show, you got me to share a fun fact, right? And so I'm going to do it back to you. So, like, what's
hmm
your fun fact? Maybe we'll kick off with that.
Yeah, so the fun fact actually came to me because in at Cottage Health every other week we welcome new employees and the executive team gets up and has to introduce themselves with a fun fact. And these are different questions every week, every time we do it. So I have to
Hmm.
kind of be on my toes. My go-to, which is pretty neutral but interesting fact, is that I got engaged at the top of the St. Louis Arch.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a very special. That would have been a very special moment. Did you manage to get like photos, videos? Someone like friends were camping it,
No,
and
it was before there were
uh,
cell phones everywhere. But I'll tell you, um, it was kind of a do or die moment because you're trapped up there. So
oh,
like if if it
you,
didn't go well, there wasn't really an escape hatch.
so funny. It's
Yeah.
almost like you were forced to say yes in
It,
some sense. But I'm glad.
was premeditated, I'm sure. We're still together after 25 years, so it worked
Yeah.
out.
Oh, good on you. That's lovely. All right. Well, let's jump into it. For me, like I said, you're the first CLO on the show. We've had a lot of phenomenal leaders in the legal department world, but typically from the technology and the legal operations side. So many people become lawyers. I studied as a lawyer. I didn't even successfully become a lawyer. But not many actually make it to CLO. So what path led you there, and what do you think you did differently from the rest that got you to sort of the chief legal officer position?
I was thinking about that question, Evan, and I think I, I don't know that I did anything differently. I think that there is a common perception that luck meets opportunity, or preparation meets opportunity. I was at the University of Southern California for 15 years and had a very supportive mentor and boss in our general counsel. And she gave me progressively greater responsibilities and opportunities to lead. And that really kind of prepared me to kind of take on the next step and what we call the big chair. And I would just say, an openness to try new things. I do a lot of kind of informal mentoring through the podcast, through the legal department podcast, and people are always asking me, how do you get to this role? And it really is seeking out different and stretch opportunities. And then some advice that Scott Becker, who's the creator and host of Becker's Healthcare, said that the key to success is being competent and nice. And I think I'm both of those things.
I love that. I like the, competent, I think most people would take as obvious, but the nice part is interesting, right? Because
hmm
I think nice is about what I think about nice is it's kind of like giving before receiving and thinking about other people's success. And when you're kind of servient in that way, I think the world and karma has a way of bringing that back to you. So that's such a great piece of advice, and I also live by that too.
Yeah, just I think that you're being generous. I think
Generous,
that
yeah.
some people live in a scarcity mindset. There's some supervisors or leaders that are kind of hoarding those opportunities, and there's a paranoia that maybe they're going to get usurped by the class coming behind them. But I think the best
Mm.
leaders are those like yourself that are generous and trying to be open for other people to also succeed.
Yeah, no, absolutely, I agree. Um, So let's talk a little bit about Cottage Health, right? That's
Mhm.
where you're working at the moment as CLO. What do your day-to-day look like as a CLO? And I guess how is it unique being in healthcare?
Well, healthcare is great. It's kept me interested for over 20 years because it's complex and it's always changing, and it has a real immediate direct impact on people. So that's why I love it. The CLO role that I have, I oversee all legal affairs, compliance, internal audit, and government relations. So I'm they're all legally related, but they're different. And so I'm working with different teams from those four different areas, my executive colleagues. Every day is different, which is again what's kept me interested for so long. I mean, that's I'm sure if you talk to GCs in any industry, they would tell you every day is different, and they start out with a list that they want to accomplish, and they never get to that. You literally don't get to the list because there are everybody else's priorities. There's the line out the door, and each day is a new adventure.
Yeah. So it kind of reminds me a little bit of my day-to-day life too.
Yeah.
So walk me through it. So you wake up, you're probably the moment you log on, there's already all these different messages, emails, and all these different
Hmm.
channels.
Hmm.
And you have to like manually prioritize what's most important, what's most critical to the business. Maybe your CEO is probably calling you up potentially directly on the phone if something really bad or really exciting is happening in the business as well. Like what's some of the type of work that you kind of work through as a CLO?
Well, I mean, it is the modern workflow that you're referencing. I mean, it's
Mm,
getting text messages, it's checking, certainly the emails, the first place you go every day. Second though is right to the calendar because the calendar, and I know we'll talk about this later, the calendar is what drives priorities. The way you
mm,
allocate your time, excuse me, is what you give importance to and what are the priorities of the day. But certainly, that email, and I've been working over the last, 6 months or so to try to tame that and not
mm.
be so reactive to that. But the email is certainly can be for those of us who haven't fully embraced, a intake management system, so to speak. It can become the to-do list.
Yeah, absolutely. I always think of it as lawyers, we're trying to be great business partners. We're trying to be helpful to our to the people that we're serving, and because of that, the inbox can be, it's the way that people get to us, but it can also be quite distracting because it's like this ever compounding to-do list that just never shortens. It only gets longer, and as you kind of take things off it, more things come in. And it's hard because it's coming in chronologically, but it's not coming in terms of priority. So
Yeah.
you end up trying to be a very good business partner and like responding to things as they come in. And before you know it, you're not necessarily working on the most important or the most important things actually, right?
Yeah,
So
no,
do
that's
you,
that's exactly right. That is exactly right.
so speaking of, I guess, being a good business partner, I guess as I think about lawyers who are starting out in their career, they're very focused on maybe like the lawyering aspects, the black and white letter law. And as they get more and more senior and eventually become, like a CLO like yourself, they can't just be the best lawyer in the room. They also have to be a really great business partner, a really good business operator. So what does that mean to you? Like, what does being a great business partner actually mean and look like?
Well, and we kind of talked about this on my show, you know, and I would share with the junior folks in the audience that being the best lawyer is not the in-house role is not about that. The in-house role is
Mm,
about solving the problems of the business. And so being a good business partner means I am paying attention. I am actively seeking out. I am curious about those business problems. I know where the company's goals are, and those are in my awareness as I'm dealing with all those issues that we talked about. And as I'm looking at the emails, I am thinking, Evan needs to close the next round of financing, or we've got to get this customer, or we're going to onboard this many salespeople. Like, I have to be
Mm.
aware of that and align my department to accomplish those goals. So I think especially for lawyers that come out of private practice, private practice is about getting the right answer. And it's about solving a problem, but not in the way that business people necessarily need to hear it. And there's not training around being aligned on the business goals.
Yeah, I could not agree with that more. And private practice lawyers are incredibly important. That's usually where people start their careers as well. And obviously, we spend a lot of money with private practice
Mhm.
external counsel for the great expertise that they bring. So full respect to them, but I do want to share a story. Like I've seen a lot of red lines on even contracting over my time, and it's so funny when you get something from like in-house corporate that is very practical and focused on just the like managing risk appropriately, but also kind of just getting on with it and getting shit done, versus sometimes when you get uh like outside counsel involved and it's like the entire document's read, like the whole thing is
Yeah.
torn apart. And that's sort of like reflective of sometimes, in corporate like in-house legal, um, like there's other things beyond getting the legal risk fully covered. It's like there's speed, there's practicality, there's business priorities that sometimes might be in conflict, right? With maybe having full legal coverage and protection. So how do you typically think about balancing, I guess, speed, practicality, business priorities with protecting the business from, again, legal and compliance risks?
Well, look, can I back up and maybe help you understand why you have those two different experiences?
Please, I would love to.
Um,
Yeah.
so, so in private practice, those lawyers are concerned about two things. One, they want to bill hours.
Mm,
They want to keep you as a client and, make the most of that relationship. Second of all, they are worried about malpractice risk. And so
mm,
if they do not give you that comprehensive red line, if they do not highlight all of the legal risks for you, if something were to happen down the road, you would potentially have a claim against that firm for malpractice. And so that sort of misaligns the incentives. As an
mm,
in-house lawyer, I am I don't know that I'm aware of anybody who has been, you know, uh, sued for malpractice by their company. I don't even I don't know that that's happened. I could be wrong,
mm,
and so that removes one of those incentives from my in-house review. However,
mm,
it really depends on the company culture because there are cultures where there's a lot of blame, that there's
mm,
rough justice accountability. And so if there's a culture where, no one wants to get caught holding the bag, your in-house lawyer might be more cautious, might over redline.
mm,
So, to you as a CEO, I would say make sure your culture is aligning people that, we want to get the work done. Nobody's going to, lose their job if this comma is in the wrong place.
yeah.
Um, so in terms of my role allocating risk, it is goes back to being aligned with the business goals and the culture and what does the CEO want? What's their risk tolerance? If I've got, a startup CEO that wants to, shoot into outer space and, be the biggest, next best thing, then risk isn't as important, or the types of risk that I'm going to be focused on are a little bit different. My tolerance is going to be higher. If it's an established company with, a big brand, you're going to be more cautious. And so the role of the lawyer, again, follows the business. I really do believe
Mm,
that it's not
mm,
my rules to come and tell the business how it should be. Now, there are certain things that, and especially in the GC seat, the board can look to the lawyer as sort of the parent in the room. They look to you
mm,
as like you are the you should be the ethics police at this company. And so there are certain things that you do have to kind of have a, little disassociation with the business goals. If the risks are criminal, for example, if there's a huge brand issue, sort of the seven deadly sins, as we say.
That makes complete sense. And I think that's what makes it so tricky because it isn't sort of black and white. It's not very clear. It's a judgment call a lot of the times, right? And I think the closer you are with your business executives and the business goals and understanding that, then the better decisions and the judgment that you can make as well. So how do you, Stacey, then um, get informed or be in the right rooms or the right conversations. Legal isn't often perhaps invited in at the very beginning of, a business endeavor, or like maybe if something goes wrong, they'll pull legal in, or maybe you get brought in at the end. How have you, because I know you've got a really good relationship with your business, like how did you build that? How did you kind of get earlier in the context piece?
Well, I'll go back to my earlier experience at the university. I mean, I sort of came into a culture where they valued the lawyer's input. And so, and at one point I felt like I was in way too many conversations. Like I didn't need to be the person, weighing in on this event or whatever. Um,
Mm.
I think for me personally, being somebody who gives an opinion, I think that lawyers are very cautious about that. I actually did a podcast episode with Tracy Lessitar Smith, who is the former general counsel of NASCAR, all about giving opinions because we're trained as lawyers, and there's actually ethics rules about this, about giving the information to the client and letting the client make the decision. And that is absolutely the way it should be. However, I have an opinion, right? I
Mm.
I like, very similar to the CEO, I see the waterfront of issues. And so I might have an opinion, and it's good to share that. And I think being somebody who was willing to speak up got me in a lot more rooms. The other
Mm.
thing that I do or did, that I don't know that others are comfortable with, is that I would ask to go. If I wasn't included in, let's say somebody, one of our business development folks was working on a deal, and it sounded like something I would probably end up working on anyway. I would just ask them, like, "Hey, is it right time for me to learn more about this? I want to make sure I support you." And I mean, almost always they would say, "Absolutely, come." Now that has an impact, which is that my calendar is very tight. Like I like to know. I want to walk shoulder to shoulder with you as you're building your business, right? I want to be someone you can rely on. And so then that does eat up my calendar time. But
Yeah. But it means that you can I mean, ultimately you're making the best decisions for the business because of that. And there's this I can't remember the exact quote, but it's kind of like at some point as you become like a business executive, it's not about necessarily the number of decisions that you make, but like just making one or two really good ones. And so everything else around your day, around gathering context, is about making those one to two most critical decisions a day or per week or month, whatever your cadence ends up being as a business. So maybe that calendar space that's been taken up is for good utilization.
I'm sure it is. I'm sure it is. I
Yeah.
mean, it's really just a self-inflicted wound because then I've got to deal with all those emails.
Yeah, that's true. The emails don't stop. So, there's something that you mentioned earlier that resonated. You said there's a line of people outside your door, right? And
Hmm.
um, often there's a saying where legal is often seen as a department of no. I know that a lot of legal departments and GCs try to debunk that sort of branding that legal has. If you have a long line outside of your door, then surely you must be saying something different. If you're saying no all the time, I don't think people will be lining up just to hear that. But you can't surely be saying yes all the time. So if you're not saying no, you're not saying yes, like what are you actually saying?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, there's some go-to lines that I'll share, but
Okay.
a lot of times when people come to legal, or you want to, let me say this, my goal as a GC is that I want to be a sounding board. And so
Mm,
many times people, I mean, I would say 8 to 9 times out of 10, their questions are not legal questions. They just want somebody to sort of bounce things off of. You sort of are seen as somebody who has opinions, helps people make decisions. And so a lot of the line is people that, just want a thought partner. Um, in terms of, those legal issues, and it goes back to balancing risk. I mean, my go-to answer is yes and, or
mm,
another one I learned from Kate Dugan, who's the general counsel of Energizer, is don't say no, ask how, you
mm,
know, and asking questions to that business partner about, I always want to know the goal, because sometimes, and I don't know, I'm sure this has been your experience as well, people lock in on a tactic and they're just very committed. Maybe they've spent a lot of energy building towards executing this tactic, and yet not really looking at the larger problem they're trying to solve. And there may be other ways to get there. And so that's what I really try to do is, again, focus on the end goal. And if the tactic is going to lead us down a road of a minefield of legal risk, there's almost always another way to get there that is less friction.
that makes a lot of sense. So you almost become really a problem solver, a collaborator. You're looking at what kind of outcome they want to get to, and maybe there's an alternative path,
Absolutely.
or maybe even some sort of shift in the way they're thinking about it. So it's almost like it's not yes and, it's almost like yes if. It's like maybe
Yeah.
we need to make some tweaks here and there. Like we can still do this 99% to your vision, but you can't say this or you can't do that.
Right.
Um, very
Right.
interesting. I
Right.
think it's such a simple principle actually, but it is a very big mindset shift, I think, for a lot of
Absolutely.
lawyers. I love that. All right.
Well, can I
Um,
ask, what has been
yeah.
your experience with, have you had lawyers that are thought partners like that?
Yes, I have. I have. And I've also had ones that have not been. So I've seen sort of both sides of the table. I think, to be honest, like as a CEO, I'm gonna make the business decision anyway.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like I've had advice where it's been uh like strict, if you will, and I'll use my
Hmm.
judgment to say I understand fully where that all's coming from, but that's just not gonna be practical. Like that's just gonna
Hmm.
be a complete showstopper, or it will literally be contradictory to the culture of the company that we've built over all these years. Like this concept of like transparency and radical candor that's built into the fabric of Checkbox. Like sometimes um, legal risk is about like not overstating sometimes your
Right.
opinions and your positions, right? And to me, it's like, oh, but then like that's so it's tricky. Like again, as much as I think legal counsel make judgment calls, I think as executives on the business side, we also make judgment calls with the information at hand. But I've also worked with really great lawyers who literally, as you've said, like laid out the facts and then sort of left me with that to make ultimately the business decision. And then I will always ask them as well, like, hey, you have seen so many different of these scenarios in your career, way more than I have. Like, what's your opinion? Like, I understand it's an opinion. So I will also seek out an opinion and get a balance of that as well. So yeah, it's a bit of a mix, and I think if I guess CLOs, GCs, lawyers want to have a seat at the table, to have a line outside their door to be a sounding board, I think it's being able to be a bit more business minded, as you say, someone like you, Stacey, right? So,
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, but I mean, gotta say, not everyone likes that. Some people,
mm,
some lawyers, and maybe I don't know many GCs will be successful if they don't, but many lawyers just like doing the legal work. And that's
mm,
fine. I really
mm,
do think that's fine. But I do, for anybody that's in-house in particular, you know, wanting to be a thought partner, wanting to solve the problem and not just, get your red line done
mm.
is core. So
Yeah. To be honest, well, maybe this is my bias, but I find it so much more interesting of work anyway when you can blend the legal piece into business problem solving, right? Like it just becomes that much more exciting. And then the impact that your work has on actual business outcomes and seeing that is a lot more exciting. But I mean, I'm a CEO, so like I have a strong bias
Well,
in
I
that
mean,
department.
that's why I'm in the role that I'm in. You know,
Yeah.
the law firm life is a little, you know, it's episodic. I get to help, or
Mm,
I think I'm going to help you with this problem, but I give you my advice and I don't know if you followed it. I don't know if it was helpful. You know, didn't get to see that deal go into action. So, yeah,
yeah.
it's a good fit for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, we talked a little bit about relationships earlier on, but we didn't go deep. I want to double click on it. I know that I've seen other sort of things online. Your name pops up all over Google if you search it, and I know that you've talked about the importance of building relationships,
Hmm.
and I know that's one of your North Stars, one of your guiding principles, and one of your superpowers as a CLO. Um, so, what is your tip or top tips on building strong executive relationships? And maybe we'll start there. So, what are your tips for building like really good relationships?
um, well, I guess the first tip is that building relationships is part of the job.
Mm,
So as you're looking at that calendar, as you're looking at those emails, have space for relationship building. You know, get to know that Evan likes the Backstreet Boys. You know, have that be a priority that you know something personally about your CEO.
yeah.
Um, that you spend time, you know, going to coffee, just meeting with your colleagues. You know, for you know, depending on the business unit and the demands and all that, I will have recurring one-on-one meetings with folks, and I do that to show them I'm committed to serving your business. You know, your team is important to me. So really making that a priority. It doesn't just happen. You have to be intentional about it.
Mm,
Um, and then, you know, this is another, you know, Bratcher rules is,
mm,
you know, bringing a curiosity mindset. I think that, you know, we are trained, and you mentioned your law school training. You know, you're conditioned to be competitive and to know the answer, and so that can lead to sort of one directional or transactional communication, and that's
mm,
people don't like that. You know,
mm,
normal people, like, that might be great in a law school classroom, but real people want you to be interested in them. You know,
yeah.
they want a an exchange. They don't want just one way communication. So, you know, that would be my other piece of advice, is to really bring a curiosity. You know, maybe you have a colleague that's difficult. You know, you don't have a good working relationship. I would make
Mm,
a deliberate effort to try to get to know them and understand, you know, why are they this way? Why is it so
mm.
important to them to do whatever? You know, I think that learning more about people helps us connect and have better relationships.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I think, you know, this is what makes, I think, being a business executive and a chief legal officer as part of that bench so challenging as you step up from maybe being like an individual contributor into one that is now more
Hmm.
cross-functional and collaborative because it's all these soft skills that are really hard to like learn overnight. I think like you could be the best performer, but then not know how to work with people or have that curiosity, as you
Hmm.
say, and that just like maybe innate natural ability to build bridges with very different personalities and probably very strong personalities at the executive level. So some of those tips that you gave are super easy to use. Like even the like taking interest in something, remembering something. Like when you said Evan loves Backstreet Boys, I lit up. Like I just couldn't help it. Like as a human, I was like, oh my God, like she remembers and so like little things like that is a good starting point. But to your point, like it has to be beyond the surface layer. It can't just be, oh, like I remembered one fact about you. That's a starting point.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's really trying to be curious and not have those defenses up and genuinely trying to build a human connection because ultimately at work, we're all just humans doing our best and trying to, you know, work together and do the best for our clients and customers as well. And so sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we get into like full work mode and we forget that ultimately it's just like we're humans trying to work together. And that's a really good place to build a foundation of a strong relationship.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And the other thing, and I don't have a tip for this, but it is true about me, is that I genuinely enjoy connecting. Like that's
Mm.
actually why I started the podcast, is because I felt very isolated up here in lovely Santa Barbara. And so like I love learning that you like karaoke and that, you like the Backstreet like that. I'm legit interested in that. And so
Yeah.
but some people aren't. Like my
Mm.
husband, I mean, I'm just gonna kind of whisper, he doesn't care. Like
Yeah.
that's not him. So you don't want to force that,
Yeah.
but if you
True.
can bring an authenticity and genuine interest, I think that also really wins the day.
Love it. Love it. So, who are typically the people that you build relationships with? Obviously, the CEO is a very key stakeholder.
Mhm.
Who else is typically a critical stakeholder in the CLO world?
Well, it depends on the company, quite frankly.
Mm.
I just did an episode this week of the legal department with Alex Sue, who
Yeah.
heads sales for Latitude Legal. And we talked all about the sales team. I don't have a sales team at my health system. We don't need to sell.
Mm.
People get sick just naturally. They show up at the ER. Um, but it is a key relationship for many people in my seat. Many in-house lawyers work with their sales team, and there can be a lot of friction there. So if I was at a company, a high growth company like yourself, and had a sales team that relies on legal, I would make every effort to be besties with the VP of sales and biz dev.
Mm.
I mean,
Mm.
um, HR, I think that is a uniform area where relationships are important, because employees are, a good portion of the legal work is dealing with employee and benefits and all those sorts of issues. Um,
Mm.
Finance, you really want to know the people that control the money. Um, for many reasons. I mean, there's obviously, regulatory reasons to care about that, the audit, but also, there's certain strategic issues. I did a episode on litigation management with Adjo Agarte Tego Seymour, who heads litigation for Albertsons, and
Mm.
she told me how important it was for her to know finance. She meets with her finance team all the time, because when you announce settlements, how you reserve, for potential litigation exposure is a key part of her role. So it really, I think, Evan, depends on the company, where you sit, the clients you serve, but those, CEO, HR, finance, and then, any number of others are key relationships. For me, I also, we don't employ a ton of doctors. California doesn't really allow that, but I
Mm.
meet regularly with the head of our medical staff, because
Yeah.
doctors are a big part of what we do in healthcare, and I want to make sure I'm close with them. So,
Mm.
just an example.
It's a really good answer, and I think it just again reflects actually the thematic, I think, of what we've been talking about already, which is like you have to be a really good business partner. So what does that actually mean in the
Hmm.
context of relationships? And that depends on your business. Um, Super helpful. We've been talking a lot about sort of the CLO role in terms of relationships and judgment calls around risk management, but there is another whole other area as well of being a CLO or GC. And it's really around legal operations. It's like running the actual processes
Hmm.
and the department itself. You're not just the most senior lawyer or trusted advisor, you're also a department head, just like the head of finance or the head of sales, etc., right? And so you've told me before that there's two camps of GCs that you see, right? Like one camp is the GCs who understand legal ops, and then there's the GCs that just haven't gotten there yet. So can you elaborate a little bit by what you mean by that?
Well, it does kind of go back to how lawyers are trained. We
Mm.
are not trained to run anything. We're trained to understand technical stuff, tell you that you can't do stuff, and be the smartest person in the room. That's the training. And so um, when you get into, and you alluded to it earlier, that there's just like this deluge of inbound emails and texts, and people want things. And so the business of the legal department is a service business. And so your number one goal is servicing your customers.
Mm,
However, to do that, you really should have some infrastructure built around that department so that you know who are my customers? How many things do they ask me for? What are the type of things? Are there any common things they're asking me for that I can create a self-service track?
mm,
At the end of the year, how many requests did I service? So there's an infrastructure that you don't necessarily know would be useful. Um,
yeah.
and there is such a demand on your time that it can be easy to ignore that. And so, and I would say that legal operations, I think, has gotten, really in its stride in the last decade or so. Was
Yeah.
not something, certainly when I was at the university, we had like a billing system and kind of a case, like I would call it case reporting system, but we didn't have a matter management system. We didn't have
Mm,
an intake system. There's a lot, CLM. We didn't have any of that
yeah.
stuff when I first started. Now it has evolved, and we're building that at Cottage, but it's sort of like an extra. Like it's,
Mm,
and the other thing is as a GC, you are a specialist on your team, your executive team. So, and you're also seen as somebody that like has this technical expertise that the others don't. And so there's not somebody that's telling you, "Oh, hey, you really need to have this infrastructure for your department." You kind of have to
mm,
know what would be available, what is possible with legal ops and technology and solutions and all that. So, um, it's I don't know that there are two camps, but it's a hard thing I think for folks to really commit to because there's just such a demand. There's such an inbound demand. That was a
yeah,
long
that makes
answer. I'm sorry, I
sense.
was sort of meandering there.
No, 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 that's good. I think what's interesting is them like I almost see it as maybe like a maturity curve where you might start with on the furthest end, like people who are just not even aware um, of legal operations and they're not even thinking in that mindset. And then I
Correct.
think, and then it kind of moves into kind of what you're alluding to, which is maybe they are aware of legal operations, they know it's important, but they're not actually able to do anything about it because of the capacity constraint. Like to do ops
Yes.
properly, you do need to dedicate a lot of thinking, but in a very different way. It's like a complete context switch from like solving legal problems to like process problems.
Right.
And and then you kind of move further along and then it's maybe you start to implement not technology necessarily, but maybe like what you mentioned, maybe it's like making certain low value templates available, maybe it's checklists, maybe it's a spreadsheet, like nothing too high tech. And then eventually you kind of hit the furthest end of the maturity curve and you have maybe a legal ops person to provide some capacity to implement some technology. And so I think maybe when we think about the two camps, it's more so split down that very first bucket, which is, well, I think all GCs and CLOs should at least be aware of the importance and the value of legal operations, and then how you make it happen maybe is like tactics. But
Yes. But
yeah.
it is something, that you need to that at a GC level need I think is essential
Mm,
to incorporate in that department.
mm,
I and we've talked before, we're on a journey.
mm.
I built there was no in-house legal team before I got to Cottage Health. It's a 133-year-old organization and, 4 years ago I showed up.
Wow.
So, so it's we're getting there, and it's we've talked before about kind of the friction in getting new technology.
Mm,
They need technology to do cardiac catheters and deliver babies and actual patient care. So I'm not necessarily a high priority for
mm.
limited resources. So
Yeah. But you've got that legal operations mindset. You've also invested into legal operations quite a little bit in your team as
mhm.
well. Can you walk us through a little bit as to like how you've personally sort of invested in legal ops at Cottage Health?
Sure. And again, I want to just set the stage that I started is a startup legal department in an established organization. during COVID, by the way. So
Yeah.
this
Oh,
was
wow.
this was, COVID in a hospital. At one
Yeah.
point we
Exciting.
had so many patients, they were talking about moving us out of our executive offices and turning those into patient rooms. I mean,
Whoa.
it was quite dire for a while. So if you put that context, I'm trying to give myself a little bit of grace that I haven't made more progress, but um, we installed a document management system. I mean,
Mm,
that seems no duh, like a simple thing to have, but it was quite an endeavor to get that. Um, we did I had an outside consultant do an assessment of our legal ops readiness, which has been great for us to kind of have a roadmap of where we want to go, and we have a strategic plan to move that forward. I have half FTE that's devoted to legal ops, and we're exploring different technologies. One of the constraints, and I'm sure this is not uncommon, is our organization has certain enterprise level software and systems, and we've prioritized those as sort of the use this unless, and so
mm,
for example, legal billing, we have an ERP system that handles all of our invoicing. It doesn't do what a legal invoice review system would do, and so I'm making the case that I need that. We're talking about, I as I really want to measure what we're doing, and I want to
mm.
measure our work. I want to know who our big customers, our big clients are. And I want to I want to get out of managing from inbox. I
Yeah.
think that's a real mistake. So legal intake's another big priority for us.
Mm.
Um, it's a journey though. And so I have made, I give myself a B minus on legal ops. I mean, or, maybe I should give myself better points because, it was started during, crazy COVID and, I'm just the first lawyer. I don't know.
Well, I'll give you an A plus for mindset and
Oh,
attitude because
thanks.
I and look, I think that's the foundation, and once you have that, the rest will come with all of the skills that you have, Stacey. I'm not I don't have a shred of doubt in my mind.
Oh,
Um,
thanks.
let's actually talk about what you just mentioned there around like being able to see what comes in and like intake and that visibility layer because I think
Mhm.
ops to me ops is about doing work better, but it's also about being able to measure and see the kind of work that you're doing as
Mhm.
well, metrics, visibility. Like I speak to GCs every day. That's the privilege I have in my role. And this is such a common theme and such a big trend that is spiking now, I think, across the industry. Um, and a lot of the times when we think about measuring that for legal departments, it's actually quite tricky because, to your point, a lot of the volume comes in email. Email doesn't do reporting in the way we need it to, or it comes in Teams messages or Slack messages, and as you say, like a line out your door. So for legal teams, I think it's really hard to get that data unless you have something systematic in place. But for you as a CLO, like what do you want to have at the at your fingertips from a data perspective? If you could walk into the executive room or like think about how to better run your business, what metrics would you like to have in a perfect world?
Well, I definitely want to know who my clients are. Who are my and how what is the demand
Mm,
that each client is, what's the IT department's burn? What's my HR team? All those. I want to know who the customers are and what is the level, the demand that they're. What are the services they need? I also
mm,
want to know um, what is my team actually working on? Um,
mm,
because I have, and this is not uncommon, and I don't want to, use a pejorative of forum shopping, but clients can ask different lawyers the same question. And
mm,
that leads to a lot of churn and burn. And we don't have time for three lawyers to be answering the same question. So
mm,
I'd love to know, and I don't need to know everything, but it would be good to know, like, what are the questions being asked to the team. I'd like to know
mm,
turnaround time, how long, because I don't get that. feedback here, but in the past I have had feedback about it takes forever to get something out of legal. Well, it would be great to know. And CLM does give you some visibility into that. It's, not great if you don't optimize all those workflow features. Um, so that, and then again, the type of work requested, it's helpful because it's helpful for me to know who are the big clients and what's the demand, because then I can determine whether I'm resourcing it appropriately.
Yeah.
Likewise, the spend, that's why a legal billing system is really tops on my list, because if I want to know how much we spent on the XYZ deal, I have to either print out all those invoices manually and have my legal ops person add it up, or I have to go to the firm, which is super
Mm.
embarrassing, by the way. Like, oh,
Mhm.
hey, XYZ firm, what did we spend on that deal? Like it just is
Yeah.
it just is ridiculous. So that's just at a high level. If I could walk, it would be amazing just to walk in and poof, it's ready. But it's a long road to get there. By the way, as I was sharing that, we do have a contract lifecycle management system. So I didn't take
Okay.
credit for that. So that I'm going to move me up for the B plus.
Okay, nice. Perfect. That's super insightful. I think if I were to group some of the themes of the metrics you put there, like there's almost like there's two buckets of which you would use the metrics. Like one is to make operational decisions like resourcing. And I can imagine a world where maybe there's a trend of a particular type of work, like you said, like a certain part of the business. Maybe it's people like HR coming to you for whatever reason. The organization has grown. There's more HR requests. We now need to hire an employment attorney, right? Like it kind
Mm-hmm.
of gives you that zeroing in on resource allocation. And then the other side, not operational, but maybe like more value and storytelling, like the what you mentioned around like the cycle times, is the other use of metrics. It's like what kind of story do we want to tell, and that kind of gives us a peace of mind at legal, but also maybe have more uh, realistic and honest conversations with our business partners. I often find that everyone has an intuition when we're moving,
Mm-hmm.
100 miles an hour, but intuition and that's where different opinions may form. And then when you actually look at the data, it's like, oh, oops, actually, I didn't even know that legal was doing all of this other work, or I didn't
Right.
know that legal was really fast on jumping on my task. It was that they had to get inputs from different parts of the business, and so it's not really legal's fault. Legal was just the steward of this part of the process. So, like, I think data just gives a better base of honest and real conversations as well. So
Well, and you need to have it at the ready, like
yeah.
I will say I've had a CFO say, I know you're busy. I know you're working hard. I don't need you to put a report together for me.
Mm,
That's nice. However, I've also had years where our budget has been, our actual spend has exceeded budget, and it took a lot of manual time to tell that story. So
yeah.
having the ease of having that data to sort of explain, to tell your story, as you said, I think is was
Mm,
helpful. And then I think, when untapped or new frontier is, can you learn from data what things you could do better with automation? Are there
mm,
AI tools you could like
it's true.
without knowing what everybody is working on, you can't problem solve and remove and make things faster and more efficient. You're just sort of like, oh, we're just going to keep doing the same thing. So,
Yeah.
a
That's
lot of
interesting. So
potential.
yeah, so instead of like the resource allocation point, instead of that necessarily being another headcount, it could be an opportunity for, as you say, automation, AI technology. That's actually really clever. Makes a lot of sense.
Hmm.
This sort of like last question I have for you, I'm very personally curious as well. Um, I think a lot of legal operations people, in whether they're just starting in their career or they're very mature in their career, they're always thinking about what does my GC or what is my GC or CLO thinking about? How can I add the most amount of value and be a valued partner to them? So, like for you as a CLO, what do you look for in a great legal operations partner?
It's a rough skill set to find, but it's somebody who is both strategic and process oriented,
Mm.
so um, definitely like, I mean, I think if core to legal ops, and again, it depends on how much headcount you get. But if you had to have one person, the blocking and tackling, somebody who can make all these things happen is like the core, I think, a core skill set. The best people are people that know strategically, are a thought partner for me in figuring out
Mm.
how can we use legal ops to move our department forward. And I think that
Mm.
there are, I don't know a ton of legal ops people, but I think the best are that combination.
Makes sense. All right. Well, to wrap up, you on your show, I shared
Hmm.
that I love karaoke. You told me that I think that you would love to at some point open up a little karaoke bar
Yeah.
in Santa Barbara. So let's pretend you've opened up this karaoke bar. I'm there. I'm celebrating the opening with you, and we head into the room. What is the
Yeah.
first song that you're gonna sing in
Ooh.
your fresh new karaoke bar?
Well, so I do love karaoke.
Nice.
And one of my favorite songs to do is not a song that you would consider or would think that a middle-aged white woman would sing, but
Okay.
um, Dynamite Hack did a version of Eazy-E's "Boys in the Hood," and that I've done that many times, and it is a crowd pleaser. So that's
Yeah.
what I would say: "Boys in the Hood" by Dynamite Hack.
Oh, that sounds so fun. I look forward to singing that with you as you open up that karaoke joint sometime in the future in the future, hopefully. But Stacey, thank you so much for being on this show. I've had a pleasure. I had a lot of fun having this conversation with you. And for everyone else as well, if you haven't checked out the Legal Department podcast, please check it out. There's been some incredible guests there. A lot of who I met in person, and I could not speak more highly of the people who've been on that podcast. You can find it at legaldepartmentpod.com.
That's
Okay, I think I got
right.
that right.
That's
Yeah,
right.
okay, good.
And one of my favorite guests was Evan Wong.
Yeah.
It was great to get the CEO's perspective. So thank you for that. And thanks for having me. This was great. You're such a lovely, generous person. And I really enjoyed, I felt your curiosity in learning more about my role and
Oh,
what makes us tick. So thank you.
likewise, Stacey. All right. Well, thank you so much. And for everyone else, thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time. Bye now. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Go with the Workflow. If you found it valuable, you can subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast app like Spotify or Apple Podcast. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leave a review, as that really helps other listeners find the podcast too. That's all for now, so we'll see you at the next episode.